Hello everyone and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. I've been thinking of doing a video of Paul McCartney and Wings for a while, so today is the day. When I was a teenager back in the 70s, I was strictly a Beatles fan, though I loved the singles coming out by all the ex-Beatles, and that time I never gave up hoping they would get back together. It was stupid and stubborn of me, but my twin sister, on the other hand, always loved Paul McCartney, and she began to get his albums before I did. And she also had a few Wings books, and I would always look at them and listen to the albums. But I didn't really know much about the history of this great band, and I got the book Band on the Run by Gary McGee, and I found some interesting information about Wings and how Paul got out of his depression and started anew. So today's video is going to be about these very early days that the Wings got started and what happened in the band, and then I'll probably do more videos from the book when they discuss more things that happened in Wings through the years. But the first thing I'll start with was Paul was out of sorts. Well, when the Beatles broke up, Paul felt useless. Paul himself stated, "I've been a bass player and I've been a co-writer with John, and suddenly all of that was taken away, and I just thought, am I any good on my own?" Paul realized he wanted to be a singer in a band still, and he decided to form his own band. But Paul got his inspiration from Johnny Cash. Johnny hired different musicians to play various concerts and albums. He wanted to do that so he wouldn't get rusty and forget how to do it. Paul convinces Linda to join. Paul first asked Linda to join him, and Linda said, if it's going to be kind of casual and if we're not going to sweat it, we could maybe do something together, which kind of sounds like she wasn't quite sure about if she wanted to or not, but little did Linda know, but it would be more demanding than she realized. Paul wanted her to learn how to play the piano, and she wasn't as musically inclined as Paul, and he started to get a little bit impatient with her. And Linda said, "He really put me through it. When everything was wrong, I used to say, I thought you knew how to make a group. I never realized how hard it all was." So Paul does get the band together. It's September the 2nd, 1971. The group forms. It's Paul McCartney, Linda McCartney doing keyboards and backing vocals, Denny Lane guitar, and Denny Sewell on drums. Well, Denny Lane was the first person Paul contacted. He played in the Moody Blues in a group called Air Force. When Paul contacted Denny, he was living in his manager's office, so the timing was right for him to get something going. And then Denny Sewell was a studio musician who had played on Paul's album Ram, and Paul admired his work, and he was the person he called to join up the band. Well, I guess I should take back that I got my Denny's mixed up, because Denny Sewell was the first person he called to join the band, and then he called Denny Lane. Denny flew his wife Monique from New York to Scotland, where they moved to an outbuilding on the McCartney's High Park farm. And then last was Linda, who was just a photographer at that time. Paul and Linda discussed what to name the band, and Paul suggested Wings of Angels or Wings of Eagles. And Linda said, how about just Wings? She felt that one-word bands were easier to remember. So the first album the group created was entitled Wildlife, and it was released early December 1971. The album didn't catch on with Paul's fans, and the critics didn't like it, and felt like it was worse than the Ram album. But we all know that Ram album is pretty special. I really love it. But 20 years later, Paul said, if you liked the album, you must have liked him. He admitted to making mistakes on it, talking about Wildlife. And the song Bip Bop went nowhere, and he cringes every time he hears it. Okay, now Paul decided it was time to hit the road. Paul wanted to go on tour to connect with the audience. Denny Lane told Paul that if they were going to do live shows, they needed another guitarist, so they got Irishman Henry McCulloch to join. All the group except Linda was hesitant. She felt like since she wasn't a professional musician, the press and the public would be negative, and Paul wanted her with him on stage as support, so she decided to do it. So she's kind of brave. Paul decided to start the group from the bottom and work their way up. They started by performing at universities, and the crowd paid 50 pence, which was a bargain. Any money they made, Paul split evenly with the band. It was at this point that Linda felt like she didn't really belong. When the band first started, Linda was frozen with stage fright one night, and Linda forgot the chords, and Paul had to tell her what keys to put her fingers on. The audience thought it was a joke, and everybody was kind of laughing. But she finally got through all that and started playing. But Denny Lane accepted Linda in the band, and the other two tried hard not to let their feelings show. Denny Sewell and Henry McCulloch liked Linda, but they couldn't relate to her as a musician since she really wasn't one. But Paul was very encouraging to her and said everyone has to start somewhere. And he was thinking of Ringo when they first started, him and the Beatles, and George Martin didn't want him to play on the albums. Ringo showed his style, and he got better and better, and now he's really a great drummer. So he figured Linda could probably do the same thing on the keyboards. But she got to be a good musician with a raw edge. And Paul admitted in the early days of the group, no one in the band could say no to Paul. So his songwriting wasn't as good as when he was in the Beatles, and Paul said he was a little dry. Paul still wanted to tour in 1972, and this time Paul decided to rent an open-top double-decker bus. It only went 35 miles an hour. They painted it with a Wings emblem in the shades of yellow and blue, and they decided to do a tour of Europe. This time the press got wind of the tour, and they appeared at their first appearance in France on July the 9th, 1972. Denny Sewell said everyone was scared, even Linda, and she told him, "I don't want to go out there." And Sewell said he told her, "Come on, baby, we're going." And the group put on a good show. The concert had songs from recent singles, some new songs they had done, and some old rock classics. Paul was afraid to put any Beatles songs in there because he felt the audience would think that the Wings songs weren't as good as the Beatles songs. Though the group was getting better and better, Henry and Denny Sewell still didn't think Linda's playing was improving fast enough. They thought if a professional pianist like Billy Preston was in the group, it would be a really great band. And one time Paul got aggravated with Linda and said he was going to replace her with Billy. Then he apologized and kept Linda. Now, the tour had problems. When the group went on their tour of Europe, they had to figure out how to handle the marijuana they had on them. And they had to go through customs, and they could be jailed if they found any drugs. Well, there was a friend of theirs in London who would mail marijuana to the hotels where they would be playing. And then, according to the book Band on the Run, they would smoke it and throw out any leftovers before moving on to the next country. Well, the band ran into trouble when they were in Sweden. The police intercepted the marijuana that was in an envelope for Denny Sewell. And the police met them after the show, and they were taken to the dressing room. And then they were taken to the police station, where they were there for several hours. And that's when Paul and the band confessed, and they said they smoked hash every day. They were fined for it. Paul, $1,000 fine, Linda, $200, and Denny, $600. And then they were freed. I can't believe after that they continued to smoke, but they would toss out the drugs when they neared another border, and once they were there, they would get a new supply. But more frightening than getting arrested, there was an incident where Paul was threatened by a young man who came up to him and Linda at a basement nightclub. He said to Paul that he had a gun in his coat and he was going to kill him. And then the guy went off to another part of the club, and Paul and Linda were all shook up, of course. And then when Denny and Henry arrived, Paul told him what happened. So Denny and Henry went to where the man was and pulled him to the ground. And the man told him he was only joking. Now, that's not a very funny joke. And then the guy ran out of the nightclub and he never came back. The European tour ended in late August. It was a success. Henry McCulloch said it was the real magical mystery tour. So Paul was feeling insecure about his future after the split with the Beatles. He knew if he didn't get back into performing in a band, he would lose his skills. He got Linda involved because he wasn't feeling confident, and she could be there as a security blanket. Once he got used to being in a new group and performing in front of the crowd, he started to regain his confidence. It must have been very intimidating to begin a group for the first time after being in such a successful band as the Beatles. Luckily, he had Linda to push him back into the music world, and we could all be grateful she did. Well, I hope you liked the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, that would be great. Also, if you want a notification of when a video is released, hit that notification bell and it'll let you know. So I hope everybody's been having a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of the Beatles Forever. Thank you. Bye.